That's
yeah. I'm in the UK, so
okay.
I'm in the UK, so exactly. I've been free from lockdown.
Whereabouts in the UK are you?
I'm in London, actually.
London,
In
okay.
London, just Surrey docks.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
Hello, David.
Hi there, Hugh. How are you?
Friend. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Hello, Graham. Not sure we've met, but
hi, Dennis as well.
Hi, David.
Oh, there's Dennis. Where are you, Dennis? I don't see you yet. Hi, Dennis.
Good to see you.
Ah, good for you, Dennis. How are you doing? Nice to see you again. Been in a few meetings together recently.
Yeah, meeting after meeting.
Oh my goodness, exactly.
This is bizarre, isn't it? How life does seem more hectic and more meetings than ever. Now that we can't actually meet people face to face, we seem to just be more meetings rather than fewer.
Yeah, it's the same thing with teachers in the classroom, by the way. Tell us that the workload has doubled, sometimes tripled.
Yeah.
Is everybody on admin? I think we're missing Miss Erica Miranda and then Mr. Mod Seka and then Miss Kira Bo.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Mr. Morseka.
Oh, okay. So which account are you using? Admin, the one that says admin.
Let me see. No, the one that is with the IP address of 8399682449.
Okay. I can't seem to locate it, but
You can't see me?
Yeah, I cannot see you.
Let me see.
Okay.
One of the admin ones, the top admin one.
Okay, it must be
when you talk.
One. Okay.
Yeah, the top admin one is
one that makes. Can you please turn your video on, if that's okay?
Yeah, it's already on.
Okay, I can't seem to see.
You might need to plug it and unplug it on the computer or something if there's a thing. Try that connection, but
okay.
Because it doesn't seem to be the Zoom side. It says it's on here, but we don't see it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Hello, sir.
Okay, good. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay, we have everybody. Miss Erica Miranda, welcome. Okay, I think. Okay, so I just want to cross-check if we're on the same page in terms of order. So all the speakers are going to have, let's say, 5 to 7 minutes to make their individual presentations. So at the beginning, I'll just give a short introduction, and then I'll set the format of discussions, which is I will call each panelist one after the other. So there's an order here. Mr. Hugh Mclean, you will go first because I hear you have to leave somewhere.
4 o'clock, by the way.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just let you go first. And then we have Miss Erica Miranda after Mr. Guang Cho Chang. And then next we'll have Mr. Maud Seka. After Mr. Maud Seka, we'll have Mr. David Archer. After Mr. David Archer, we have Dr. Graham Arthurton. After Dr. Go, if she's on. However, if she's not on, then we will have Mr. Dennis.
I've just sent a WhatsApp to Kadabo, and she's confirmed that she's about to join.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
But
I'll repeat this when she gets on.
But I was not online. Can you just confirm that?
Okay.
but I
So,
think they're not saying anything.
Mr. Signolo, you will conclude this with your presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And then after all the presentations, I'll just give some concluding remarks or reflections, and then the panel will be over. We should be done in about 55 minutes from the way I've paced things. So
Are you going to be keeping us to 5 minutes and vigorously, or what's the
I'll probably interject. But if you can time yourself, please try and keep it to 5 minutes so we can finish in about 55 minutes because we're already running late.
Yeah, just to say, I was told it's 7 minutes, so.
Yeah, well, it's 5 to 7 minutes, but because we're already running behind, if anybody takes 4 minutes, I'll give you their minute.
I'll do my best as well. I will timed it to 7. I'll cut it down a bit if I can.
Okay, that's fine. You know what? I'll just shorten.
I've timed mine to less than 5, so someone can have a minute or two for mine.
Okay, wonderful. We don't really have much time for question and answer at the end, so there's 5 minutes to spare at the end. Not to say that everybody should take it judiciously, but okay. So I'm going
Is there any Q&A at the end?
No, there isn't really Q&A. There isn't Q&A. Because this session is just sort of presentations. What I'll do is I'll open up for probably the basically, offer some remarks, maybe in response to anybody's presentation, just for a couple of minutes. But then we wouldn't be having a formal Q&A.
Okay.
Yes, please. Okay. So you're welcome, Ms. Kyra Bow. I'm going to run through the order again. So I'll give a short introduction of myself and of the panel just in about a minute. And then I'll set the format of discussions again to say that each panelist, when called, you will introduce yourself briefly and then go ahead with your presentation. And now this is the order of presentations. Please estimate 5 minutes for each person. So first will be Mr. Hugh Mclean. Second, we'll have Mr. Guang Cho Chang. Third, we have Ms. Erica Gomez Miranda. Fourth, we have Mr. Maud Seka. Fifth, we'll have Mr. David Archer. Sixth, we'll have Dr. Graham Atherton. Seventh, Ms. Kyra Bow, Mr. Dennis Signolo. And after Mr. Dennis Signolo concludes, I'll come in to give some closing remarks or just a few seconds reflection, and then also throw it back to you in case you have any responses to your fellow speakers' presentations. And that should take till maybe only about 3 of you will get to speak at the end, if anything. Thank you. All right, hello, good afternoon. All right, good day, everybody. Welcome to the Africa Students and Youth Summit 2020, organized by the All Africa Students Union. My name is Papa Kujobotio, and I will be your moderator for today's first plenary session. Today we have a high-level panel on the topic, Education at the Brink of Collapse, Finding Sustainable Funding to Protect Education. On this high-level panel, we have a spectrum of speakers, experts, really from across the world on the topic of education access and also sustainable financing in education. To introduce myself, my name is Papa Kujobotio. I'm the former president of the Oxford University Africa Society, and I'm also a PhD student in comparative and international education here at the University of Oxford. So we started a few minutes later. We'll have an hour in this session, and each a 5 to 7 minute presentation on the topic Education at the Brink of Collapse, Finding Sustainable Funding to Protect Education. And I will run through the order of the presentation. So each speaker will be called forth and we'll give a short introduction of themselves instead of I giving the introduction, and then we'll go ahead and deliver their 5 to 7 minute speech. After all the speakers have spoken, about 8 of them, we will quickly summarize in about a minute and then open the floor to the speakers to give some reflections on the different perspectives that their colleagues have shared. So to begin with, I would like to invite Mr. Hugh Mclean, who will be given the first presentation for today. Mr. Mclean will introduce himself, but just by way of brief introduction, Mr. Mclean is the Senior Program Advisor of the Open Society Foundation. You're welcome, Mr. Mclean.
Thank you so much, Koju, and greetings, colleagues and everyone. So my name is Hugh Mclean. I, in 2019, brought very little actual change. Less true, perhaps, for Ethiopia, although we need to be watching the Tigray war. But in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic really began to give us a glimpse, I think, of the nature of African democracies. Zimbabwe and Uganda, as we've seen, using the pandemic as ways of clamping down on the opposition. And there were shootings and killings to enforce lockdowns in Kenya, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe, and I heard of some in South Africa. And as we watched the spectacle of the US election results and President Trump behaving badly, Tanzania, Guinea, and Ivory Coast are simmering in the aftermath of their elections. Senegal, I have to say, set what I believe was a world-leading example, following science and consulting with teachers' unions during the early months of the pandemic. All these events show us that democracy is something we can never take for granted and that we have to fight to preserve it. We're also seeing ongoing conflicts in the Sahel from jihadist organizations and their hallmark attacks on education, and worrying developments in Cabo Delgado province in Mozambique. I mentioned the Tigray conflict, and of course Somalia continues its decades-long civil war. Our second mountain, then, is Mount Finance, which, like Mount Kenya, has at least 3 peaks: debt, terms of world trade, poverty and inequality. The Institute of Health and Metrics and Evaluation from Washington University estimates that extreme poverty went up 7% in just the first few months of COVID-19 in Africa. This tragically ended what was an unbroken 20-year-on-year trend towards poverty alleviation. The World Bank projects that at least 43 million people in Africa are now at risk of severe poverty as a result of the economic crisis brought on by the pandemic. And the IMF predicts that between now and 2023, Africa faces a 1.2 trillion in financing needs, and of this, 410 billion at least will go to paying off debts. Foreign debts by 2023. We must expect this to put huge pressure on budgets for health and education particularly, but all budgets. Our third mountain is Mount Climate Change. Africa has taken great steps to drive and implement the global climate agenda. Very high levels of ratification of the Paris Agreement. Over 90% of governments have signed. And they've also promised to go green in a relatively short time frame. These are good intentions, but they're sure to be disrupted by the economic fallout in the post-COVID phase. in terms of the real indicators, what we're seeing is continuing rising temperatures. 2019 was the warmest on record for Africa. We can expect a lot less rainfall in southwest Africa and in the north, and there's likely to be increased intense rainfall over the Sahel. You'll remember the intensive flooding that affected 700,000 people this September in Niger. We also saw Tropical Cyclone Gati, which made landfall in Somalia in November. This is the strongest cyclone ever recorded in the region. We can expect to see rising sea levels and coastal erosion, and inevitably food security will be impacted. The number of undernourished people in Africa has increased by 45% since 2012, including FAO. And finally, comrades, I think you'll notice that I don't mention a mountain demographics as something that needs to be overcome. Africa's hope is its youth, but there will be enormous population pressures, doubling probably by 2015. And this will mean for education, as we all know, that we have to run in order just to stand still. So forgive me if I've, in this short address, been short on solutions. I hope we'll be looking at those and that the rest of the panelists will come in on that. But even if I really need to hear them from a 60-something-year-old white guy sitting in London, I do believe we will find them, and find them you must, not only for Africa, but for the planet. And for this, you'll need strong organizations and strong partnerships. So I would just like to leave you with 3 things that I believe are crucial prerequisites for finding sustainable financing that will protect education. The first is how to build ASYS membership and its internal democracy, and how to, that means identify and bring in new members. Secondly, how to build alliances, particularly with teachers' unions in Africa, to find your common causes, to share your struggles, and to look. And lastly, the thing I think that's going to be important is how ASU can take a confident lead and find and offer solidarity in the student movement globally through your membership of the Global Student Forum, but also the other alliances that you build. So these are the mountains that I believe we need to climb now in the summit and that next summit. And I look forward to your leadership in this period, and I salute your leadership for your efforts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hugh Mclean, and thank you for that very descriptive metaphor that you've used to describe the different challenges that we have. Finding sustainable funding to protect education is important, but there's so many different mountains that we have to climb to their summits during this particular pandemic and even beyond. Thank you for that submission, and we'll have the rest of the panelists react to that later and add on to the perspectives that you have shared. Next, we have Mr. Guangchou Chan. Mr. Guangchou Chan is the head of policy at UNESCO, and he will be going straight into his presentation. He'll give us a short introduction of himself before he begins. Welcome, Mr. Guangchou Chan.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Guangchou Chan, as you presented. Chief of Education Policy Section here at UNESCO headquarters. So I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting UNESCO at this youth summit and deliver a message on the important topic of global solidarity and the role of young people in recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and building back better. So as we all know that the current health crisis has led to a temporary yet massive closure of education institutions. So the impact of the crisis on education will affect the world for decades to come. The pandemic has exacerbated the existing disparities and inequalities across countries and within countries, slowing down to the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goal on Education, SDG 4. According to our estimate, some 24 million learners may not return to their educational institutions this year when they reopen to so many millions the children and youth already out of school before the crisis. The largest share of learners at risk of not returning to school after are projected to be in South and West Asia as well. So UNESCO has been developing some programs to support countries in their efforts to mitigate the immediate impact of school closures. In March 2020, it launched the Global Education Coalition as a platform for international solidarity and innovative solutions to protect the right to education during this period. So I'm proud to count ASU, or Africa Students Union, among the members of this coalition. However, a huge disruption has been caused to the educational settings, while all students will need support to make up for lost time and learning. The crisis has particularly affected the most disadvantaged groups of population. So education systems around the world, regardless of the income level, had entered into crisis without being prepared. We need to build back better and strengthen the resilience of education systems. But this requires funding. Yet the COVID-19 pandemic affected the world economy before economic activity came to abrupt halt and a sharp recession with a detrimental effect on public revenue raising capacity and budget allocations. I think other colleagues, speakers will talk about it. So amid these challenges, government reacted swiftly, making massive fiscal measures during this period to save lives and protect workers and their families. And according to by mid-September 2020, the world has deployed massive stimulus packages of some 12 trillion US dollars or even more. Despite this huge disruption caused to the education system by the crisis, the education sector has been largely invisible in their fiscal responses, with less than 1% globally allocated to education. So may I remind that the financing gap for achieving SDG 4 in the world's poorest countries has been already high before the crisis. And COVID-19 is piling up additional costs on education, already facing a huge challenge in the efforts to achieve SDG 4. Developing countries now have to contend with additional challenges, just like the richest countries. At the same time, you have seen countries, some promising examples where governments have committed to leverage the power of education and training as key investment, not only for ensuring a robust economic recovery, but also for sustainable, inclusive green transformation of the economy. So UNESCO, I'd like to repeat that the UNESCO advocates for protecting education investment during this period and beyond, as a strategy to fulfill the right to education for all, especially for the most vulnerable populations, as well as an efficient, effective, and sustainable economic recovery strategy. This year, 2020, and this month, particularly December, marks the 60th anniversary of the Convention Against Discrimination in Education, and we unfortunately witnessed that the COVID-19 has widened the pre-existing pre-crisis disparities and inequalities in education. So what we would suggest, invite governments and their developed partners to protect education in their financing and prioritize some enabling areas for achieving SDG 4 and other SDGs, such as providing direct and targeted support to the most vulnerable populations in order to mitigate massive numbers of children and youth at risk of not returning to school. And the international aid must also prioritize countries most in need of support. And government will need to develop and implement education and training policies that equip youth with the relevant skills towards an inclusive and green recovery and structural transformation of the economy. And also, we know that the crisis has revealed the weakness of our traditional education systems. So strengthening education system will require investment, possibly high in the short term, but with the longer term benefits to strengthen the resilience of education systems. No one country or one organization can solve these problems alone. The COVID-19 education crisis taught us that we can work together to face the common challenges, and youth can play a critical role in this endeavor. Youth is not the future only, you are the present. You can make a difference by mobilizing international solidarity, working out innovative solutions, and acting to deliver results. So I believe that this platform of dialogue provides a great avenue for discussing ideas and exploring actions that are needed to secure sustainable funding for education and to build back better. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guangchou Chang. There are three things that I took from your speech, and that is the efforts that UNESCO is making to partner to mitigate the impact of school closures, that the financing gap for SDG 4 has still not been met, and also there are massive numbers of children and youth who are at risk of not returning to school. From the rest of the panelists, we'll hear different perspectives. And the next speaker, Miss Erica Miranda Gomez, is an expert and is the president of the College Sports Association in Cape Verde. And she'll introduce herself and give her presentation now. Thank you.
Obrigada. O meu nome é Erica Miranda, sou presidente da Federação de Estudantes aqui em Cabo Verde. Agradeço à ASYS pela oportunidade de estar aqui presente, partilhar convosco um bocado daquilo que foi a experiência de Cabo Verde nessa pandemia de Covid-19. Ouvi dizer que em África do Sul, numa universidade, existe uma placa onde dizia que para destruir uma nação não era necessário ter bombas a longa distância ou iniciar uma guerra, que basta fazer com que a educação permitisse aos estudantes a educação. Caso isso acontecesse, e os formados não seriam pessoas com qualidades. Os médicos pacientes iriam perder vidas nas mãos desses médicos, edifícios iriam se arrombar todos por causa desses engenheiros. Isso para dizer que o colapso da educação é o colapso de todo um sistema, de uma nação. E o que é que se viu-se durante essa pandemia? Durante essa pandemia, vimos o sistema educacional a entrar-se em colapso. O que ainda não tínhamos assistido, pelo menos numa perspectiva tão rápida, num espaço tão curto de tempo. Assistimos em março as universidades a fecharem as portas. E mesmo que as universidades fecham as portas, nós sabemos que o processo de ensino e aprendizagem ele não pode parar, tem que ser algo contínuo. E o que aconteceu em Cabo Verde foi o seguinte: o governo implementou um conjunto de para minimizar todos os efeitos da pandemia. Melhorou-se a condição da internet, arranjou-se televisores para o sistema de ensino à distância, ofereceu-se computadores. Mas o que foi uma grande valia, e eu queria partilhar aqui convosco, é que durante os 3 meses de pandemia, em que os nossos estudantes não tivemos aula, o governo reduziu a propina por 50%. Nós aqui só pagamos metade daquilo que era suposto pagar durante esses 3 meses. Isso fez com que milhares de estudantes não abandonassem o ensino. E pensar de uma forma sustentável de fazer com que a educação não entre em colapso tem que ser um processo tripartidário, uma pirâmide entre os estudantes, o governo e toda a sociedade civil. Existe uma necessidade de pensarmos, de agirmos de forma concreta para que o sistema não entre em colapso. É claro que nós não temos todas as soluções necessárias, mas eu acredito, se congregarmos, se unirmos e pensarmos a nível global e agirmos localmente, encontraremos as soluções, porque nós estamos vivendo um tempo difícil, e tempo difícil trazem homens mais fortes. É necessário ter uma união, mesmo a fundo, pensar isso mesmo a fundo e encontrar todas as soluções.
Obrigado, Ms. Miranda. Thank you very much. Next, we have a presentation from Mr. Mod A. Seka. Mod Seka will introduce himself, but briefly, he's the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology in the Gambia. You're welcome, Mr. Mod A. Seka.
Yes, thank you. Like you said, my name is Mod A. Seka, and I'm also very happy to be invited to such a discussion because it's very topical. Education at the brink of collapse, finding sustainable funding to protect education. I will basically speak within the experience of the Gambia. As you know, when COVID struck sometime around February, just to give you a quick synopsis of what happened. In the Gambia, as you know, we operate our budget on a calendar year. So this issue of COVID was never anticipated, even in the national budget. And when the virus struck and there was lockdown, the first priority for government was accorded to the health sector. So meaning all the resources that were available at the time that could be reallocated were dedicated to the health sector. Then leaving the education and other sectors to be second or maybe third in priority based on what you want to, classify. So in essence, innovative way of supporting our institutions so that online lectures can happen and then students will not lose a whole year. And so luckily we were able to succeed in making sure that at least they completed their lessons as well as did their exams, so we've not lost the year as such. And what have we done? Essentially, we started by first trying to come up with some support for the institutions. You have some subvented institutions that are partially funded by government, so we gave them some additional money to make sure they also enhance their IT capabilities, as well as give some support to lecturers so that they can also prepare their lessons and post them online. In addition to that, also, we initiated some discussions with the GSM operators, that's the telecommunication sector, and they were willing to open up free sites for the educational sector, especially higher educational. So they gave a free mega, but then also there were some challenges of, because the students were scattered all over the country at that time, because you will expect that naturally if lectures are not happening, they will be traveling to their respective families. So you had instances where network connectivity and all those things were challenges, and government had to give them some allowance for airtime so that they can also follow the lectures. Now, finally, I think in terms of institutional support also, what we did was the Tibet institutions, particularly when it was time to reopen, we are in fact in a very serious financial distress because they've not been collecting their fees, students were not attending, and they are not getting government support either. So this we try to also support them by giving them basic PPEs, so that it can facilitate their reopening, and that was also successfully done. However, we had also made a request on their behalf to government, which is yet to be honored. But I can say from the discussion we had with them, they are virtually in a financial distress, all of them. Some of them even expressing the threat of being closed on a permanent basis if nothing is forthcoming. Now, then we also have a peculiar case in the Gambia where you have a large number of students outside the country being either sponsored by government or by parents. But because at the time parents were also not working, some of them were having problem even getting remittances to their respective students abroad, their respective kids abroad. So the government came up with a relief package of a flat $300 per student who are not sponsored by the government, residing anywhere in the world and doing their studies. In addition to that also, because we also received complaint during the lockdown that because the students were unable to go out and do anything, they cannot get monies to even sustain themselves. So we also initiated sending those who were sponsored by the government their stipends at an early stage so that they can also get liquidity to manage their way through this pandemic. Now, after all these things, one of the key lessons we have learned is that, like I said earlier on, the pandemic caught us unawares, all of us. And if you look at the relative investments in higher education sector relating to IT, to deliver online lectures and the like, in the case of the Gambia, we had different story. Whilst the University of the Gambia was relatively ready to, transfer to an online program, all the other higher education institutions and TVET institutions had very little investments in this area. So it took longer time for them to adopt and deliver their lectures respectively. And then this brings me to a very important point, which I think is very necessary. I think COVID or no COVID, we should also prepare a business continuity plan for the education sector. Because if you don't have a business continuity plan, what it means is if you have a similar incident like COVID, it means you are going back to lockdown again. So if you have a business continuity plan, you would have assessed the relative strengths and weaknesses of IT systems in different institutions, how you intend to upgrade them so that when you want to deliver online lectures, it's possible. The other thing that we have learned is that it looks like blended learning is here to stay. I mean, the experience we have is that you might not want to be caught unawares, and I think some of these lectures can also be posted online so that the students can also benefit from that. As a result of all this, the ministry is also working on a transformative strategic plan where some of the key institutions will be transformed. For instance, a case in point is the Gambia Technical Training Institute, which we are trying to transform into University of Science, Engineering and Technology. The essence of this transformation is to focus on entrepreneurship at the end of the day. As you know, probably for those of you who are not familiar with Gambia, from other countries, which means there is a big gap. So we are trying to address that gap in this process. So in conclusion, I would just say that thank the students for this kind of initiative, and also to urge them to build on their alliance and be heard in all national and international fora where resources are being allocated. I think in some of our countries, education is still not given the priority it deserves. But if we are to move ahead, you cannot ignore education. It should be at the forefront in terms of being allocated resources and policies. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mod Seka. From your speech, you mentioned that blended learning is here to stay. It looks like that indeed is the case. And your point about partnerships with the telcos to mitigate some of those costs is very important. It looks like a number of governments in Africa had to, fall back on that option as an emergency fix to the situation. And I hope that as we draw business continuity plans, we have long-term plans on how we can ensure that, accessibility to IT resources and the internet is a mainstay really, and that in case of another pandemic, we wouldn't be struggling to find solutions like what has just happened in the last few months. Next, I would like to invite Mr. David Archer to give his presentation. Mr. David Archer is the Head of Participation and Public Services at ActionAid. You're welcome, Mr. Archer.
Thank you very much. And I Much appreciate being invited to this space, and I'm going to focus my energies on talking about that biggest mountain of them all, as Hugh would have it, Mount Finance, because it does seem to me that everything depends on sorting out the finances. And when we're talking about finances, there is going to be a terrible shock to public finances across the world, in fact. As a result of COVID, there'll be falling GDPs, falling tax revenues, and therefore gaps in public service budgets, unless action is taken, and action needs to be taken now, and it's needed urgently. And quite frankly, it's not about building back better, but building in I think, a feminist transformative manner, seizing the moment of this COVID crisis to really put an end to 40-year liberal, patriarchal market fundamentalism, and to put forward green, progressive, feminist alternatives. Don't let anyone ever tell you that the money is not there to transform public education and all other public services across Africa. The money is there. It's about political choices, and it's no failure to invest in quality public education and public services. A couple of months ago, 190 organizations signed on to a call for action on sustainable financing of education post-COVID, focusing on domestic financing. And I'm going to say a few things about the big recommendations that come from that call to action. First of all, look, there's loads of money in every country to pay for public services. It's sitting there, but it gets taken away before anything can be considered to be spent on public services by the need to service debts. And unless there is a massive new round of debt cancellation and radical debt renegotiation, it's going to be, we're not going to make the sort of progress that we need. There is some movement on this from the G20, and but it's much too little and not on the scale of ambition that's needed. We estimate any country that's spending over 12% of its national budget on servicing debt ends up cutting public spending. And so we need to look at drawing a line and making sure all future loans are taken out in a transparent and accountable way, because at the moment loans are taken out without that proper oversight, and revenue is often not wisely invested. There has to be a new process of debt cancellation. I think UNCTAD estimate about $1 trillion disappears from developing countries between 2020 and 2021 in debt servicing. The money is there. The question is, how do you spend it? Do you spend it on providing services for your citizens or paying back debt, which in many cases was taken on in an untransparent and unaccountable way? So we need a massive new movement for debt cancellation. Then alongside that, we need a massive resurgence or a new movement linking those struggling for public services, those struggling for tax justice. We've just published a collection of 25 articles. We had a couple of articles from the All Africa Student Union about education justice and tax justice, published by this group called NORAG. This is a connection that needs to be made. Most countries can expand their tax to GDP ratio by at least 5% within a 5-year period, according to the IMF, and we have shown consolidation is the IMF term for austerity. Every country that has taken an IMF loan will be under massive pressure to reimpose austerity next year unless there's a collective resistance. And there will be particularly constraints on public sector wages, as we have already seen in many countries. This is significant for young people because a lot of young people are frontline workers in health, in education, in other public services. And if we don't if there's a squeeze in the financing for public services, that will be an end to so many economic opportunities and decent work for young people. There's a lot more in that call to action. We certainly need to still fight for more aid, more harmonized aid, and aid that comes without ideologically driven conditions. But there is a clear agenda for transforming financing of public services. Most countries across Africa should be doubling their spending on education and on health and on other public services. It can be done. It's about political choices. It's about economic choices. And it's about ending this 40 years of chronic underfunding under neoliberalism. And I think that everyone needs to be part of that struggle right now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. David Archer. And just going off your last point, you know, I have just read in a May 2020 World Bank paper that public spending on education is actually going down during this pandemic. And the projections are also lower because they are based on GDP output per country. So what you're saying about expanding tax bases and also massive debt forgiveness is really important. Otherwise, countries will not be able to bridge that gap to actually double spending on education. So we hope to see how you know, these loan forgiveness programs and other, you know, versatile ways of increasing these tax bases and GDP outputs will be channeled towards education, especially as this conversation is you know, trying to center. So next we have Dr. Graham Atherton. Dr. Graham Atherton is the director of the National Education Opportunities Network in the UK, and he will be giving his presentation now. You're welcome, Dr. Graham Atherton.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you again for inviting me today to speak this event at the Africa Student Youth Summit. As we said there, my role is in the UK predominantly, but I also convene an initiative called World Access to Higher Education Day, and the All Africa Students Union can be engaged in the third World Access to Higher Education Day, or WAHED, which only occurred 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to focus really my remarks specifically in the area which I undertake most of my work, which is in the area of higher education and university education, and look again at this issue of the roundtable, looking at finding sustainable funding to protect education. I'd like to say as well that I probably agree with everything I've heard today, particularly from the last speaker. In higher education across the world by social background, shows in all of the countries of the world where we have evidence, that's over 90% participation as an equal. Inequities in university systems is a challenge that transcends both rich and poor countries. It's not the case that, okay, it may be different in scope and scale, and it's more pronounced in poorer countries. Overall enrolment is far lower. In sub-Saharan Africa, enrolment in tertiary education at 9%, as opposed to nearly 70% in Europe. The economic impact of the pandemic, coupled with a shift to online learning in a context where digital access amongst low-income communities is extremely limited, implies that these inequalities are likely to be exacerbated by the pandemic. Addressing these inequalities, protecting the funding required to stop rising inequality and might improve the pre-pandemic situation will be a huge challenge. If we look at where donor aid is concerned for education, overall, research by UNESCO showed in 2010, aid to education reached its highest level since records on disbursement were established in 2002. But it then decreased in 2011-12, and only slowly recovered since then. Between 2014-15, aid to education grew unlocks improvements in health, in the economy, and the well-being of our societies. But I'm not convinced this story is still being told properly, particularly in higher education. Despite working in what is a data-rich environment, we do not deploy this kind of data. What is it, for instance, we should be advocating for? The goals here vary across countries and across contexts. A fundamental goal, though, that transcends boundaries should be a right to education through life and for everyone. Education for certain minority groups were extended in particular countries, such as Brazil, for instance. Participation levels increased. A rights-based approach has the potential to significantly shift the debate regarding education funding at a post-secondary level. opportunity of reflection on what is and should be priorities for lifelong rights to education must be articulated. The question of how this will be paid for will inevitably come next. However, as the previous speaker emphasised, these are political choices will always exist to some degree, whether in or outside countries. The deployment of these resources be towards education, and arguments must coalesce around a straightforward and bold proposition. Gradualism in a crisis context, allowing the appeal of pragmatism and hence being some seen as lower risk, may indeed also present greater risk. Partial arguments for education not sufficient, when other voices, talking about limited resources, calls on government, other needs to fund other activities will be loud and vociferous. Being heard is essential. The final area which attention must focus if funding is to be secured in any way is collaboration and alliance building within and across sectors and countries. In higher education, the extent of political collaboration, the organisations that endeavour to present the coherent sector-wide case for funding and support, be that within countries or be that across continents, do this on a minimum level of resource with tiny numbers of staff relative to the sector they try and represent. Universities that spend millions of dollars a year will balk at spending more than a few thousand on joining a regional or national body. They're the first to go when it comes to cost cutting. Many, especially old and more powerful institutions, feel they're better served presenting their own interests first. Such endemic myopia will ultimately be self-defeating, open the door for low cost and low quality post-secondary education, attractive to policymakers because it's cheap, but not benefiting students. Perhaps by necessity really being a mother of invention here, new coalitions will be formed. The initiative I mentioned earlier on, World Access to Higher Education Day, or WAHED, is a new form of coalition. It brings together students, universities, funders and NGOs to advocate for a change in equitable access to higher education. Yet it's being delivered with virtually no resources, with 2 or 3 staff started here in London. Why is that the case? Why is it harder to utilise? Through imagination and collaboration, such as what we're seeing today with this fantastic summit and event and the partners here, that's the pressure on universities to reimagine.
The children of the poorest have had none of that. This is a lost year, and many, mainly girls, will never again enter a schoolroom. When we talk about this, it sounds like we may just be talking about the poorest countries in the world, but in fact, this is the case for many countries, including my own. Maybe not that children won't come back to school, but that there is a vast disparity between how the wealthy, or the children of the wealthy, have done through this crisis and how the children of poorer families. My country is one of the countries in the world with the best access to internet, and yet access to internet is a reason why about 15% of children have not had proper access to homeschooling through the school closures in the first few months of the crisis. So while this is a crisis, I don't want us to be defeated. It is a crisis that we have some power over ourselves. Hugh talked in his intervention about these 3 mountains. So to stay in that metaphor, we have the mountain climbing gear that we need. The question is whether we're willing to put in the effort needed to scale those mountains. We can impact the decisions that are being made right now in governments and multilateral institutions around the world. These are decisions about budget, about investments, about what is important, about what to prioritize. And obviously, sitting in this room, we all agree that there's nothing that could be more important than education. We know that education is not only the silver bullet for economic prosperity for the individual. Education can make societies more equal, more democratic, more resilient to challenges such as COVID-19 in the future, but also other challenges. It also makes societies healthier and more prosperous. But that requires that governments and those in power see that value. And that's where you all and we all have a role to play. We have to, and the announcement that they have made over the last few weeks. And we have to make those in power and the huge multilateral institutions see that cuts to healthcare and education is not how you bring countries out of an economic crisis. We have a voice and we have a role to play in convincing them of that, those in power. So at Oxfam, we work with allies and partners in fighting the global structures that put push countries to cut education budgets. We want true debt relief. We work every day to create global tax bodies that can ensure that money earned in African countries is taxed in those countries and that tax havens are abolished. We want progressive taxation, yes, but that's not enough, because even if money stayed in the country, there's no guarantee that it will actually be spent on the right things. So we don't just need aid, we don't just need debt relief, we don't just need progressive taxation, we do need all of those, but we also need progressive spending. And yes, education is the best way to spend your money, but education is not simply education. Or maybe put a different way, all education is not equal. So not only does Oxfam and allies and partners have to use all our power to fight cuts to education, we also have to fight for education budgets and the money to education set aside by countries and by donors to go to the places and people where the money will do the most good. That's in good, quality, free, public education for all, not private education for the few. So there are fights yet to be won, but congratulations on all that you do.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bo. And thank you for highlighting again and reminding us that the goal should be good quality public education for all and not private education for the few. It's quite sad to reflect and realize that this may be a lost year for a lot of people, and with the way learning is going this year, with blended learning and even homeschooling, it is possible that so many people may not go back to school ever again, because there's a new option that we are all exposed to, and whatever that option is must be developed to its fullest potential. Next, we have Mr. Dennis Signolo. Mr. Signolo is the Chief Regional Coordinator for Africa for Education International. Let's welcome Mr. Dennis Signolo to give us the final presentation of this high-level roundtable. You're welcome, sir.
Financing and inadequate investment in teachers at all levels of education. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a serious impact on students, teachers, and education systems. EI Africa's most recent study on the impact of COVID-19 on education should be ineffective. Over 80% of the teacher unions to be ineffective, mainly because of challenges related to digital infrastructure and connectivity. Necessary training and support for them to be able to deliver effective online teaching and learning. Furthermore, data costs are very high and unaffordable to many educators, students, and families. That is why Education International is calling on the African Union and African governments to regulate data costs. Unless data costs are regulated and digital infrastructure is made universal, as majority of our children and youth. COVID-19 has given rise to widening inequalities and exclusion. Rural children get left far behind because of the digital divide and long-standing problems bedeviling our country's education systems. EI is calling on governments to carry out equity audits. We need to know who is being left behind, and we should target those groups of children and youth and get them to school and to remain there. Colleagues, the right to equitable, inclusive, quality education for all can only be achieved through strong public education systems. Relying on education is not a sustainable solution. For example, results from the EI Africa study I cited earlier on show that teachers in private schools have either gone for months without pay or have been laid off. Some education is bigger and reasonable. Unfortunately, education budgets are under threat. We've just heard previously about the impact of international financial institutions, which continue to put caps on public spending. So we will continue to challenge that. Now, as teachers and as students, as teacher organizations and as student organizations, we need to join hands in defending and promoting quality public education for all. Protecting education budgets moving forward. Students are not passive beneficiaries of education policies and programs, but change agents. The future of our communities, societies, and our very existence as humanity. As a key stakeholder, you should be consulted and be at the table when education policy decisions are made. Nothing for us without us. As I have been collaborating very well with students, particularly at global level. We will, in that regard, be hosting the Global Students Forum, which is a new grouping of all student unions in the world in our headquarters in Brussels. I believe we can cultivate the same deeper partnership and collaboration in Africa, and I look forward to meeting with your leaders in pursuit of that goal. Thank you once again for inviting us to be part of this important online conference. I wish you great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Signolo, for your wonderful presentation. From your presentation, we've learned the importance of partnerships, the importance of increasing, the pot of financial support that we need for education, and also the importance of coalitions that has been earlier mentioned. Thank you very much for those summative words. So we're already a good number of minutes behind time, and we would like to go on to our various next sessions. So I'd like to thank you all, viewers and audience, for joining us on this roundtable. My own perspectives have been deeply enriched by all that I've heard over here. Thank you all for representing government, civil society, your independent organizations, and preferring solutions to all the problems in education and financing that the COVID pandemic has only really joining us. And